Hello, it's me. Now, I appear to be a little quieter than I usually am, and I'm not entirely clear on why. Oh, that's why. Alright, cool. Volume's good. Alright. Hey, I'm streaming live, and there's no audience. But I am going to go ahead and fix that. All right. Yes, there is no audience, which is fine. But this will be republished on YouTube as well, so I'm going to talk like there is, or isn't, as the case may be. Anyway, I am talking about Nibiru. Nibiru is a game from Modifius. They sent me a review PDF a while back, and unfortunately it came in when my computer had died. Just died. And I didn't really, have the facilities to do a proper review without the computer. I suppose I could have, but long story short, there were some technical difficulties. But I figured in this time of, coronavirus isolation and everything, now would be an excellent time for me to pick that up and do a review, because it's worth talking about. It definitely is worth talking about. So Nibiru is a game. Its tagline is a science fiction game of lost memories. It was kickstarted back in the beginning of 2019. Actually, about a year ago from today, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, it's an interesting game. It's written by Federico E. Sons. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know much about him. He apparently was schooled in Argentina, and this appears to be his first big RPG release. He's since done some other stuff with Modifius, but this is their first big thing. Wow, this game is interesting. It's got a lot going on, and it's not one of their 2D20 games, for one. This isn't like the Star Trek games or the Conan games or what have you. This is a different system, which I'll be digging into in a minute. But it also is a very... how to explain this? So, this game is actually using a setting I don't think I've seen anybody actually use before. This is not to say that the premise hasn't been done before, I guess, but not in this combination. The core conceit is that you are in a really, really mammoth space station. And the humans living in this space station don't remember a time when they weren't living in a space station. They, as far as they know, have always lived there. I mean, clearly humans don't evolve in space stations, but whatever. And all of the names of things in this are tied to sort of a Mesopotamian, early Babylonian, Assyrian, that era, like the absolute Bronze Age, before there was even like the European conceptions of civilization. And so you have places named and you have, those sorts of conceits in the game. And, that is interesting. So it's a world without a sky. It's a world that gravity varies depending on where you are, because it's a spinning station, presumably, and the feel of gravity is higher the further down you go. There are some suggested works that inspired this, but I gotta tell you, this doesn't actually match any of them in a lot of ways. They reference 2001, they reference Alien, The Martian, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, i.e. Blade Runner, Blame, Stars My Destination, Ringworld. These are all great books, by the way. You should read them. The Expanse series. They're all good. But tone they might match, but the actual elements of those settings aren't here. And that's what I'm saying. The interior world of this station is largely dark. There's no sun, right? But it is lit by the technology around them. It is arguably hard-ish sci-fi, in that it appears that they are, they have a set of science rules that they're following, and there's no magic exactly. It's just really high tech in a lot of ways. Robots exist in this world. There is an intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a thing. It's definitely a big deal. But the setting is wow, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. There was like an old show in the 70s, an old sci-fi show where everybody lived on essentially a generation ship and had forgotten how they got there. This is like that. That's the closest analogy I can give. The artwork in this book paints a very evocative picture of this world. It's sort of a washed color scheme where every image is a little bit blurry, like a watercolor, but it's super dark and it's super intense color choices. A lot of oranges on black, a lot of light against dark, which seems to fit the overall theme here. Yeah, and I'm in love with the setting. I think the setting is fascinating, and I think I would want to read books in this setting. Right, I want to see the fiction for this, and I think that may actually be one of the possible failings of the game. Is it does a lot to explain this world to you, but that can be difficult to sort of wrap your mind around it. It is throwing a lot of a description of what's going on in the world, and maybe you don't have a lot of example fiction to pull from, so you're leaning heavily on your imagination to come up with it. Now, what are you playing in this setting? That's a good question. You are a vagabond, which has a specific meaning in this session. The vagabond is sort of well, how to describe the vagabond? The vagabond is somebody who is an amnesiac, to a certain extent. They don't have normal memories of the world that they're living in. But what they do have are memories of other things. Things outside the experience that they've had. Which is weird, to say the least. So... And this is going to be tying into the system. I like how the setting conceit and the conceit of what the players are playing ties very well into the system. Sometimes that can be hit or miss, but in this case, I think it's a hit. They definitely landed the blow, as it were. Because they are recovering memories, the system is about recovering memories. You do make some choices in character creation of basically what your memories are tied to. Now, these can be sort of an interesting mix of things. You get different creatures that you are, or different histories that you're drawing your memories from. So one example is you can actually draw your memories from an AI. Remembering an AI long lost to the people on Nibiru. Like, they don't remember. This is from before the current era, before anybody's memory. So you'll be remembering things like they call it the machine, and the example that they give is I remember wandering off the storage area when the master was off to play the white piano we had in the main room. One day I got lost in the melody and didn't realize the master was watching me. She smiled and asked me to return to the storage area. So that's a memory that you could have written down of this is something you remember being. And this gives you a clue as to what life was like back before. And your character creation, you start with, where you're from. You start with whether or not you're from a high gravity or lower gravity section of the station, and where these memories come from. And then the rest is discovered in play. So you try and do a thing. Say you, try and hack your way into a computer. Well, you don't remember why you know how to hack a computer. You just know that you just try and, well, you hack your way into the computer. And then you spend memory points, and that generates a memory tied to your origin. And this memory can either be positive or negative. Negative means that you have a minus to an action. Positive means that you get a bonus to that action. And you can tap that every time thereafter. So I, would do this memory of hacking anytime I wanted to hack something, which is cool. And it's, similar with violence and so on. You're spending these memory points, and you get so many memory points a game. And when you get enough memory points, you can buy revelations. And revelations are sort of special, almost magical senses, I guess, that you get that give you some information beyond. And so you end up with like the ability to sense things about somebody. Like, one of them is if you touch them, you can learn a thing about their memories or who they are. and it's a lot of sense powers. Revelations are sense powers. Um, the overall system does, like on a combat level, has a much more, how to put this? The system doesn't seem to be designed to encourage combat. This is not to say that it says don't do combat, and it's not to say that it's made to be the system of doing combat is difficult. It's relatively easy. But you have 3 wound levels. And depending on how things go, you could end a fight relatively quickly. Which honestly is good fiction. Like, there's good fiction in that. It gives stakes to combat. So yeah, it's definitely a thing. They have a sort of mental equivalent to combat. And I have to say that I'm not a huge fan of the mental thing. I get the reasoning for some of their decisions. So the reasoning of this was like, you wanted to reflect madness that comes from, going through too much. And that happens to people, and that's fair. But this is a path of design that is fraught with problems, particularly for people who are, actually suffering from real world mental health issues. So, you become broken, and you can gain different mental health issues as a result of being broken that cause different complications to doing things. The problem with that is there are some people in the real world that suffer from anxiety that has nothing to do with trauma, and some people it does have to do with trauma. And there are people in the real world that do suffer from depression. Hi. And may or may not have anything to do with a horrible mental challenge that caused it. And yeah, it's so I liked I like the idea of consequences, and that you get sort of a range of different consequences for a mental battle, on a level of for dealing with mental trauma. But I think maybe that there are some people that might have a problem with dealing with that particular system. Luckily, they have a simplified version which doesn't try and do that too well. It's just you become different sort of detached or broken, and it just gives you a negative penalty. You don't have to deal with the individual diagnoses, which may or may not be problematic for some people. So I think that is probably the way to go for a lot of people. If you want to deal with those issues, certainly worth doing. And honestly, their implementation is solid. It's just, I felt like I should mention that some people are going to have problems with the idea of having to play through individual mental health issues. So yeah, keep that in mind going forward. That's really the only thing on there that I could see maybe a little problematic with the system. The system overall is pretty light. This is a game about telling stories about characters and discovering what their story is, and that's pretty neat, I think. I think the idea of people doing a game about discovering who you are is great. I've seen that done a couple of times. I've thought about doing that myself a couple of times. But this is probably the best execution of that idea. I would be interested to see if the Mimos system, the memory based character generation, would work in another setting. This one is particularly designed for this setting, but the core system should work for any game where that's your premise, right? Where you're remembering something about who you are. So you wouldn't necessarily have to use this setting to use that system. I think the setting is compelling and interesting, but I think that a lot of people might find the setting sort of daunting to dig through. You've got to go through 100 pages of setting material before you ever see a rule in this book. I mean, a real rule. Like, there's a few sort of general explanations of roleplay and how it works. But the actual setting is requires so much investment in trying to figure it out. That may be I don't think it necessarily is a bad thing, by the way. I think it's a good setting. I think it's one of the most fascinating ones I've ever read. But I think that might be an obstacle to some people to dig into it, because it is so filled with details and doesn't give you it's not a base fiction that you can attach to. Like, you play The Expanse. Well, first off, there's The Expanse TV show and series of novels, so you can just easily jump into that. But if I say it's a science fiction setting, there are some things that people are just going to know. If I, run D&D, even if the setting's a bit odd, there are a few assumptions that people can make and they'll understand it. This setting requires you to build it from the ground up a little bit. And so, yeah, that's a little more work. Is it work worth doing? Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good setting. I think they put a lot of thought into every aspect of it. I think it being firm-ish science fiction in that it has it's following science rules doesn't actually prevent it from being a setting that engenders wonder. It has mystery. It has wonder. And that is a hard trick to pull off. Oddly, I think tonally, maybe not, but there's some elements of it that kind of remind me of Doctor Who, in that there are elements of science, elements of technology that you can reach that kind of feel like magic. And Doctor Who leans into that a lot. I think Nibiru kind of feels that way. They've got AI prophets, and they've got vast chambers of fast-moving air that you can fly around in floating ships in an interior world that they don't really understand that well. And so it feels magical in and of itself. It's high technology in some ways, but it also feels like they're living in an ancient and mysterious place. I think that the setting is really... I mean, reading the book for the setting alone is worth doing. And I think that the base rule system serves it well. So, yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out if you have the time. It does take a certain kind of party to get into this. One, you got to have people willing to invest in the world a little bit. And you also need to have people that you trust to play with each other on a role play level with some, you know, odd things given up to the game master, and some odd elements that, you know, are not what you would expect. You know, the memory system is going to require a lot of trust between players and game master. And so yeah, you want to make sure you've got the right party for it. If you're looking for, like, here's a different kind of D&D, no, this isn't it. This is much more along the lines of Fate, I guess. It's much more in that end of things. So yeah, if you got a group that's used to playing with Fate, or you know, games along those lines, of more narrative style games, they're going to find this game compelling. If you're dealing with a group that leans a little more crunch heavy, wants a little more D&D, yeah, this is maybe not that game. And that's fine too. Different games for different folks. When they made the game, they also, as part of the Kickstarter, managed to get together a lot of extra supplements that were sent out. And I definitely think that the supplements were the like little adventures and what have you. There's a quick start guide you can download. They've got some interesting maps, some artwork. Let me take a look here. Let's see. Apparently, as part of the thing, they had some metal cuneiform dice, which is kind of neat, I guess, but a bit weird. There's some several adventures that were released, and you should check those out. If you're going to get this, get the adventures, because so if you're getting this, having those adventures will help you figure out what kind of stories you're supposed to be doing anyway. And I think that is going to be very useful to people, because it doesn't have a source fiction, because it doesn't have like a source show, or I can point to this and this is like this. It doesn't have that. Having those adventures is more useful than, say, adventures for D&D or Star Trek or something like that. The other thing that I would say, you know, read the whole book before you try it. Like, which sounds like, well, everybody should do that, but a lot of people don't do that. And in this case, I think you might want to do that. There are monsters in the monsters and other creatures in the book that are interesting and fit as part of the world, and are kind of creepy in a couple of places. You know, and yeah, I don't know. I came away from this game with a lot of questions, which I think is good. Having questions is good. I think, yeah. Sorry if it sounds a bit rambly. One, I haven't done this in a bit. And for another, the game is really hard to define. And I think that's going to be the element that I'm going to leave with, is I have a hard time explaining this game. And the fact that there are new things to be had in the gaming world makes me happy. Like, every once in a while it feels like, well, we've tried everything, right? yeah, this is a D&D type, this is, you know, a Fate type, this is Dungeon World, what have you. And it is interesting to see somebody come along and go, no, here's something completely new that you did not see coming. And this is absolutely that. And I think that is pretty cool. Um, the yeah, you know, I would recommend it to a lot of my friends. There are some that I'd be like, yeah, this isn't going to be your cup of tea. But you know, I have a lot of friends who like to play Fate and Cortex and some of the other systems out there, and this will work well for you guys. But yeah, if you're looking for a D&D-ish game or something with a lot of crunch to it, this isn't it. Anyway, big thumbs up for the game. Thanks to Modifius for sending me this. They have been sending me other review stuff, so I'm probably going to do some reviews of other Modifius games. They've got a Conan one that just recently came out. I need to dig through. They got some Star Trek stuff. So yeah, I'll probably dig through those as well. But yeah, I think the fact that this game even exists makes me happy. And I think I'm going to wrap it up on that. I've been rambling for a good 35 minutes about this, and nobody showed up because I'm a sad puppy. I'm just kidding. I hope everybody's taking care of yourselves. If you watch this later, if we're still in lockdown, I hope everyone is checking on your friends and washing your hands, and that life treats you well. And I will get back to you. But y'all have fun, all right?